You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio, 94.5 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate on this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, trainers, footballers, people who work in sport across a wide range of areas, sports psychologists. And we've also got a segment where we speak to some of the most influential people in the field of psychology around the world who give us some insights into their thoughts and perspectives in that area. Today, a very special guest. It's going to be a really interesting show today. I'm sure you'll really enjoy today's show. We have a business psychologist who works as a women's leadership coach who's going to give us a really interesting insight into her work, which is really fascinating. It truly is. I'm sure she's going to be able to explain it better than what I can, but I'm looking forward to the interview myself, so I'm sure that you really enjoy it. So it's Jess Baker. She's also an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. It's great to be here.
No, it's great to have you on board, and it's really interesting. I guess the listeners are wondering what business psychology involves and women's leadership coaching. But I suppose if we sort of start from the beginning, Jess, sort of what was your motivation to go into your field? What sort of motivated you to go into business psychology and women's leadership?
Well, I wanted to be a psychologist from the age of 13, if you can believe that.
Wow.
I don't know. I know.
Yeah.
Really random. Random. I think after nursing, and then I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and I there's no way I could be a nurse having to inject needles and things into people. And I was 13 at the time, so that's how simple I kind of saw it. I didn't want to be a psychiatrist because I knew you'd had to medicate patients. So then the next thing was talking therapy, and I thought, I like talking. And I think I didn't really understand what it was to be a psychologist. However, over the years, I did my A-levels, undergrad degree, and I started out life as a clinical psychologist, and I wanted to work with children. I ended up working with dementia patients. Thoroughly enjoyed my work, but like so many people, I ended up experiencing a bit of compassion fatigue, where I was really over-empathizing with my patients and their families, and taking on more emotional energy than I needed or than I should have been, really. And although I had the support, clinical support in that setting, I just suddenly felt, actually, after all these years, this isn't for me. But the next best thing was to obviously remain a psychologist. I absolutely love analysing and observing and myself and others in equal measure. And business psychology was always on my kind of plan B. So I retrained, did my master's at Aston Business School whilst working as a research consultant. And my work has taken me into very large organisations, very small organisations, weird and wonderful places. And the majority of my work at the moment, since I'm independent and have been for about 8 years now, prior to which I was employed as a consultant, the majority of my work is very much focused around how to help people feel more confident, courageous, and self-compassionate. And to be honest with you, Jimmy, when I first launched, I run a program called Tame Your Inner Critic that I'm sure we'll get onto. When I first launched that, I didn't think any of the corporates would want to invest in that kind of, it's a very personal thing when you start talking about your own thoughts and your own self-sabotaging behaviours. But the more I spoke about it and the more I introduced my clients to it through emails and blogs that I was writing, the more interest they said, actually, we feel like this. People are experiencing the imposter syndrome. People are experiencing self-doubt, and they're not putting themselves forward for that promotion. Can you come in and speak to us and share some insights? And I've been doing that for 4.5 years now, really focusing on the inner critic, stopping self-sabotaging, the imposter syndrome, and helping people, not just women, although I call myself a women's leadership coach, but men as well, find their way through, navigate their way through the self-doubt so that they can actually start achieving the career goals and the business goals that they really deserve.
That's really interesting. I mean, there's two very different areas of psychology in terms of your own experience. And how was it for you, Jess? I'm just sort of interested, really. I'm sure some of the many listeners are too, in terms of you sort of went from one area of psychology into business. I mean, what was that like for you in terms of your own sort of perception? Was that sort of, how did that feel? Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so interesting you say that, because even when I was at uni, I didn't see myself going into what Miss Piggy would call business. It's that kind of formal structure, the corporate world, the smart world, where people are really bright and people wear shiny clothes. Even although I was a mature student at uni, I had taken 2 years out to travel and do some community work. But I saw myself very much as a helper kind of person, and therefore you have to be in the NHS, or you have to be working in the kind of healthcare sector in some way. And interesting enough, though, a few people said to me, whilst we were at uni and having random conversations, like, "But I see you, in business." I was like, "No, I'm not. I didn't see myself as clever enough, Jimmy.
Wow.
I didn't see myself as. Also, that I was worried that I wouldn't fit in, and to be honest with you, I didn't really. I managed to survive several years of consulting, and I was in-house in the HR department in a senior role in the financial world for 3 years, and that was an extremely toxic environment. So I kind of didn't fit in really, but I'm glad I had that experience. And I certainly fit in well enough with my clients for them and their HR directors or senior managers working across the business, and they are the ones that hire me directly. So we find a fit,
Absolutely,
they see me and they say, well, Jess has got not just some random life coach talking about, these personal growth stories, but actually someone with accreditation, somebody with an evidence-based background, somebody who, I speak from the heart, and I share my experiences as much as I feel I need to help people feel like they're not the only ones. Because I think that's the thing, and you'll know this, mental health issues, or even just, you say mental health issues and suddenly you're branded, but I think let's talk about mental well-being perhaps, or emotional resilience. We all experience this. Like you talk about working with a subclinical population, the people I work with are high functioning, career focused, busy mums, maybe busy dads. They've got a million different plates that they're spinning, but they also have an inner critic, and they also have self-doubt, and they also question whether they're in the right job, or it's not that like you say, you have to be working in the healthcare sector to be able to help people in this way. There are a lot of people out there who experience the inner critic and worry that they're not doing the right thing, or worry about how they're coming across.
No, that's really interesting stuff. What I find interesting about what you do, Jess, and you mentioned inner critic, that's a big thing in sport. It really is, and there's many parallels to sport and sort of business too, in terms of skills being transferable, both ways really. Sport can learn from business and business from sport, but the inner critic is huge, and sort of, my understanding, inner critic is like you mentioned before, it has, it's a big variable with our confidence, it talks us how to doing things, but give us a bit of an insight into how you work with the inner critic. What is this inner critic, and so what sort of work do you do, and sort of clients do you see who have this sort of inner critic? And I suppose I know it's sort of difficult to sort of say, but where do you think that sort of comes from for people? I suppose it's probably a bit of nature nurture really, but there's a lot of questions, I guess. So let's sort of start with what is this inner critic in terms of that you work with?
Yeah, so I think there's the natural propensity for the brain to react to actual threat. And our natural propensity, as you'll know, is called the fight or flight scenario, where, okay, let's say 100,000 years ago, our ancestors are walking the wilderness, come across a wild beast, and before your logical brain has had the chance to kick in, your emotional brain is saying, do I fight this thing or do I run away? And suddenly your body is reacting, and your heart will beat faster, your stomach will stop digesting, your pupils will dilate to let more light in, the hairs on your body will stand on end to actually try to make you look bigger. A number of those things happen, but what happens, Jimmy, is that in the 21st century we don't have those. Well, we have some actual threats. COVID is one of them, and that's a whole other realm to the work I've been doing in this last year and a half. But before that, if you take an anxious moment in the 21st century context, it's actually usually just perceived threat, like an email from your boss saying, come and see me immediately, or a call from a client who you've just left thinking, oh my God, they're going to give me bad feedback, I've done something wrong, or they're going to fire me. It's that. So I think it's the space between your emotional reaction and your natural reaction to trying to protect yourself from this perceived threat. The space between that and your logical brain thinking rationally, okay, actually what has just happened here is just a phone call, or it's just an email saying come into my office. Both are, of those examples, completely neutral events.
Absolutely,
but you it's the way you react to it. So if you're already feeling anxious about something, or perhaps you're a pessimist, or perhaps something else in your life isn't working as well as you'd like it to, and you're already experiencing worry or concern, you're actually more likely to be susceptible to the inner critic as well. And it's those thoughts then that kick in. And it's like, I shouldn't be doing this. You're going to do it wrong. You're going to mess up. You're going to humiliate yourself. And those types of thoughts, if you like, so I want to put them in the workplace setting, if you don't mind. But equally, do share your experience of people who are expert in the sporting fields too, because I think there's probably very similar things that we say to ourselves that I'm not good enough. They've hired me. I was a last chance candidate. They've hired me by mistake. Can I really do the job they're paying me to do well enough? And so I think, often the inner critic, as I describe it, is those unhelpful thoughts. Because we have a whole host of helpful thoughts too, like, actually, I can learn on the job. I'm a quick learner. They'll give me the support I need to do the best job I can do. I can ask for support. And, because you have to remember that no one's ever been a CEO before the first time that they become a CEO. There's always that element of doubt. And I think it often happens for my clients in real life. For them, it's that kind of gap between choosing to leave the comfort zone and deciding to go for that promotion, or to take on responsibility for a particular project or a new client. And it's that gap between leaving the comfort zone. You're kind of almost hovering over, I call it the zone of fear, before you land on the other side. And when you're hovering over the zone of fear, it's quite narrow, very dark and very deep crevice. And that's where those self-critical, negative, judgmental thoughts live. And they kind of almost wait for us to step outside our comfort zone, to do something new, try something, to learn something.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, because that task hasn't been completed yet, there's always an element of anxiety around, perhaps performance anxiety.
Absolutely.
Is it going to be the best thing I can do? And what you tend to get with those thoughts, and I wonder how this translates to your world, are those behaviours, unhelpful thoughts, these two unhelpful behaviours, which might be something like, I'll just procrastinate, or I'll try to avoid that deadline, or I won't attend those meetings with that particular person. I don't want to have to speak up or ask any questions or answer any questions. So there tends to be a whole group of beautiful, creative, self-sabotaging behaviours that comes with these thoughts. And I say beautiful and creative because we have to take credit for that stuff too. I've run my online program, Tame Your Inner Critic, for over 1,000 women in the past couple of years. And each time I get them to journal about their experience, and they share some of that with me in confidence. And it's so fascinating how time and time again, we all have the same types of thoughts, Jimmy.
Absolutely, yeah.
We all have the certain types of behaviours. Nothing's new. And I think once people learn that, once people can hear other people sharing that experience, they realise, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only one, because that's what the inner critic is really good at as well. It makes us feel isolated, and it gives us that. Then we have a sense of shame, like, how come I'm the only person worried about this thing? Everyone else seems to be fine. What you don't know is actually they're having sleepless nights too. They're just not telling you about it.
Absolutely, it's a really interesting point you've made there, and absolutely these sort of thoughts, they sort of have a big impact on how we sort of feel and how we behave, and I suppose they are one source of sort of possibly maladaptive behaviours, even like barriers as well Jess, for example, say you got an opportunity to sort of phone someone back for a job interview, or you got a presentation opportunity to do something, and I suppose even something like enrolling on a course or doing something, you got that inner critic telling you, saying, well, who are you to do that? And I suppose in one sense, when you having said that, what I think of, I suppose you got people who may have also been brought up in negative environments. When I say negative environment, I'm sure a lot of positives, but perhaps that some of the sort of introduced values they got from the people around them were, you can't do this, and sort of know your place, and that sort of stuff. And then when you get older, you kind of have that echoing in the background when you have an opportunity, and that can be, for me, a big barrier, Jess. It's a huge barrier, because if you're not sort of, let's say, for example, I'll give you an example. So, for me, when I first started doing the work I do type thing, and I'd have opportunities to sort of work with people and say, well, you got to call this person back, and this was, just probably even before the days of mobile phones, but you got to call someone back type thing, and sort of set up a meeting and think, well, who am I to do that type thing? And I felt, for me, it was like he says, I figured out a way to sort of extend my comfort zone and say, you know what, that's just another person like me. I'll call them back, irrespective if they're a manager of a big football club, or if they're CEO. It doesn't really matter. I'll sort of, they're just a person, and at one point, they didn't even have that label, like you said there, and it takes sort of work, but I think back, and it would have been useful to have someone like yourself to sort of to work with, absolutely, and you figure things out as you go along, but in that journey of figuring things out, it can be a costly journey. Jess, there's opportunities that you miss out, I think, in life. And am I on the mark with sort of what you do with people, in terms of, are they the sort of things that they might sort of exist, that sort of inner critic that sort of prevents people from fulfilling what they would like to do?
Absolutely, Jim. And I think personally, I was brought up in a very highly critical, stroke bullying scenario with my kind of my upbringing, and my family dynamics were extremely interesting. Well, perhaps it just what drove me at 13 to think, something's wrong here. How can it be fixed? What can I do differently? And what we do is tend to internalize messages when we're very young, and the brain loves to latch on to anything. In fact, it doesn't even have to be something that was said to you. It could have been said about you, or even just in front of you. One woman, on a slightly lighter note, reported to me, and she was about 45, I think, at the time. She reported, said, Jess, I remember sitting next to this boy in primary school, and he was about 6, and I was about 6, and the teacher told him off for having really messy handwriting. And ever since then, every time I pick up a pen, I tell myself, oh, my handwriting's really messy. But the brain latches onto that as some kind of truth. And obviously, if you grow up in that environment where there are people telling you you're not good enough, where there are people that humiliate you, you are naturally going to internalize that. And a lot of the work I do with people is to counter that, and go one step to countering that. So I would counter it by, firstly, can I just say that my principle about coping with the inner critic is to get to know it. I've read books called Banish the Inner Critic or Conquer the Inner Critic. I don't think that works. You cannot turn this thing off. You cannot stop it, but you can control how you respond to it. And the personal principle I've got of befriending your inner critic, getting to know it, is actually also based in some kind of neuroscientific evidence too. Yeah. But anyway, I digress slightly, so can I come back to that in a second?
Absolutely,
I want to answer the question about this kind of internalizing these messages, and yes, you're right. The people I work with have missed out on life because they've internalized the messages. I'm not good enough. Who am I to do this? If I speak up or step up, then I might humiliate myself. Or I'm getting too big for my boots. We carry these stories, don't we, about how you should and shouldn't behave. Now, yes, and that can be really confusing, because at the time when you're growing up, you've got there are almost 3 streams of information. We've got our parents and significant others, like teachers and people who we spend time with. We also have social standards social norms. So depending on which culture you grow up in, are you expected as a woman or a man to take a certain role? There are gendered roles. I mean, we're trying to break those now, right? But I'm working with 30 to 50-year-olds. So, these are very pertinent themes. A lot of the women were told to get married or thought they should get married and have children and not focus on a career. And now they're thinking, actually, I want a career and I'm 40. What can I do? So the social standards and societal standards really affect us too. And then, of course, we've got our peers. And our peers, we're wanting to fit in. We're wanting to be part of the group. It's safe when we're part of the group and we belong. So we adjust. And we think, okay, well, what are they like? They look like a cool or successful bunch of people. I want to be like them. And we're continually morphing and trying to navigate our way through all of these different sources of information, none of which are really that healthy if you think about it. None of which are saying, hey, be you. You're unique and beautiful and brilliant. What strengths have you got? Work to those. They're all saying, no, fit in here, fit in there, fit in there. And that's when a lot of the tension and the inner conflict, as Karen Horney described it, arises, Jimmy, when there's an inner conflict, like, well, I think I should be doing this because that's what my parents told me to do, that's what society said I should do, and that's what my friends are doing, but actually I really want to be doing this thing. And how can I have the strength and the inner strength to do that, and that self-efficacy, that I can attitude, to believe in myself enough. And can I say one more thing about one of the other things I try and help some of my clients with, not all of them, because this has to land in the right way, and I spend a long time introducing people to the idea of this, but if you can allow me a minute to explain, like, parenting yourself. So we can learn to reparent, and that's something I've done. I mean, I did have an amazing childminder who was my auntie since from the age of 4, and she was my rock, my guardian angel. And if it weren't for her, I definitely would have not followed through any education at all. I just would have kind of slipped off the edge of society, I think. But there is a way, and there's usually at least one source that most of us have of that unconditional love when we grow up. And even if we didn't, we have the capacity to develop that for ourselves. And a lot of the work I do is around helping people to develop that sense of self-compassion, being as kind to yourself as you are kind to your friends and your family and your children and your animals, your pets. You're soothing and reassuring, and you're nurturing them all of the time. Turning that inward is really, really important, and we all struggle with that to some degree. And then there's the additional element of actually saying, okay, well, how wasn't I parented? How can I parent myself now? I do have the skills, and I do have the self-awareness, and I do have that ability and innate ability to love and nurture. So why don't I turn that into towards myself?
That's really powerful stuff, Jess, because I think for me, certainly in my experience, and maybe the listeners can sort of relate to this to a point, but I speak to many people who've done some good things, and they work really hard, and not just about achieving, it's just about sort of the sort of contributions they make and the life they lead, and it almost like hesitant to share anything good that's going on, and or sort of they're almost afraid to say at times that they're going to try and do something, whether it be write a book or start a social media channel or do something. It's almost like they're afraid to mention that they're going to do that because they're going to get shut down, and it's quite sad, really, I think, in one sense, because you think, well, you know what, that people can't share success stories sometimes, or they don't feel comfortable sharing because they're afraid of being sort of criticized. And the thing is, what I think is interesting with your work, Jess, is that, I mean, what's really interesting for me with the work you do, we sort of go back to the days before social media. Now, if you've got the inner critic, if you're on social media and you use it as a mechanism to sort of share stuff, then it's almost like you're exposed. There is that danger that it's going to get compounded. Jess, it's like, okay, I sort of, to paint a clearer picture, say for example, like I like to do sort of things like tunes and write books and articles and that sort of stuff, and sometimes people ask me, you're not sort of afraid that people are going to sort of maybe criticize and comment, and I said, well, many years ago I sort of got beyond that. Obviously we like praise, but you sort of focus on what the message you want to get out there, and it's one of them. Some people are sort of buying into what you do, some won't, but it's okay. But I think that comes with sort of what you mentioned there, sort of parenting ourselves, and sort of, because it wasn't always the way for me. I mean, there's probably a point in my own sort of life where I wouldn't even dream of sort of doing a video or doing an audio or anything like that, but it was almost like a way of doing what you said, that inner parenting, saying it's okay, And do you not find that people are kind of afraid to share their success because they might get sort of shut down and the critic gets a bit bigger?
Yeah, absolutely, Jimmy. It's really difficult playing that one because we are told to, especially here in this British culture that we have, that you're supposed to stay quiet. You're not supposed to be too egotistical. You're not supposed to shout or brag. You're not supposed to self-promote yourself. In fact, I did a brilliant self-promotion post this morning on Instagram because I thought, well, if I'm not promoting myself, who is? But I'm also doing it because that's what I say to the people I work with. You need to be able to promote yourself, because if you're going to get overlooked for promotions or undervalued at work, other people are going to be taking the credit for your work.
Absolutely, yeah.
Then how is that fair? How is that a fair representation of your talents, your strengths, your proactive attitude? Of course, there's a fine line, isn't there, between being confident and arrogant.
Yeah, absolutely. But you read my mind there. Just I was thinking that. Yeah,
exactly. But but a lot of the self-doubt is perpetuated because we don't even say how good we are. We're like, I'm always doing it now physically. If you can see I've got one shoulder kind of going up and my cheek going down, like in a shy pose, like, oh no, don't talk about me, oh, little me. Hello, you're amazing. You've got skills, you've got talents. Please share that with the world. You don't have to brag about it. You don't have to become arrogant. Most likely you won't become arrogant because you're so conscientious and so aware not to overstep the mark that that's probably not going to happen and not even a risk for you. But there is a sense of, what I like to foster in people is that sense of strong, quiet confidence, inner confidence. And I kind of describe it like, can you imagine a big top tent? Am I saying it the right way?
Absolutely, yeah.
A circus tent, big top. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, so a massive circus tent, beautiful Hollywood style. Okay, it's huge. Let's go back to the 1940s, but let's pretend all the elephants and lions are treated really well and everything's happy, right? Beautiful circus tent. What's in the middle of that? It's called the king pole, the main pole holding all of this stuff up. We've got the trapeze artists coming and going. We've got the lion tamers. We've got everything, like the whole hubbub of the circus before the show starts in an hour. And that big top needs that king pole to be really sturdy, because if any wind or storm comes along, the whole thing gets blown over and everybody is squished.
Absolutely.
What you need as a person is a really strong king pole. That inner core, you have to believe in yourself, you have to trust yourself, you have to know your value. And because if you don't, then the self-doubt takes over, and then the questioning yourself and wondering why and wondering what if, and you've got this desire to be somewhere else, something bigger, but you're stopping yourself because you don't feel like you deserve it. So if you or any of your listeners, and I'm constantly kind of putting in the polyfiller in mine and sanding it down again, and always trying to heal and to solidify this inner core, because it's fundamentally who I am and what enables me to talk about the stuff I talk about. And I like talking about it. So thank you very much for inviting me onto the radio program, because I love talking about this stuff, because we have to start the conversation. And I'm hoping at least one listener might start this conversation with someone they know, and it has a ripple effect then, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's, a great point. Obviously, so it's one person sort of, makes a change, and it has a knock-on effect, because it also affects the way we behave with other people too. Because I think there's a lot of, defense behaviors as a result, in terms of the inner critic. So, people sort of how they feel about themselves, it impacts on them. There are certain situations that people will avoid. Because they feel they're not sort of worth being in that situation. And I suppose the other side of things too, just that we sort of touched on very, very briefly, there is a sort of that sort of fine line between, say, confidence and competence too. And I think that's sort of where a professional like yourself, to work with and say, okay, to use an example, an analogy, if I said to you, Jess, I want to fly a plane tomorrow, it would be a stretch too far. The inner critic would be right to say, no, Jim, that's not a good idea, because at least you wouldn't want to be in that plane I'm flying. I've got no experience to do that. So there is a fine line, do you think, between, okay, there is, but I think a lot of people have got the competence, they lack that sort of confidence because of the inner critic. But do you sort of agree there is that sort of fine line between, okay, let's sort of assess this situation for what it is, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with a lot of my new coaching clients, when they come on board, I get them to send me any information they've got on perhaps a recent performance review, or I ask them, and I just ask them face to face as well. Actually, with all of the praise that you're getting, what are the weaker areas in your current situation, maybe in your career or whatever. So we have those very frank conversations, and if they've got evidence that they want to share with me, that they can. But mostly it's people saying, I've been told I should be going for promotion. This is the second year I've put it off. My managers still think I'm doing a really good job. I just don't feel like I have the confidence to do it. I don't think, I can't see what they see. And that's where I come in and I help them shift their perception of themselves so that other people can. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's really interesting stuff. They kind of sort of reappraise. And I like that approach, Jess, because, as much as I enjoy listening to sort of, I'm sure the listeners of some of them at least will have sort of seen some of the high profile motivational speakers who tell you can do things, but I've always thought from early on, well, how do they know what I can and can't do type thing? And that sort of motivational speaker who sort of stands over someone, and I think for me, yes, it's got some value, but I like a methodical approach, Jess. Sitting down with someone saying, this is where I am, this is where I want to be, what can we do? And these are the barriers, if that sort of makes sense. I think that, I'm all for it, and I don't want to sort of be disrespectful to sort of some of these motivational speakers. I've been to some of the events, but I like the approach where you kind of, methodically think, okay, what can we do to move forward? Does that sort of,
Yeah, definitely. I think that they go hand in hand, really. So often in the beginning of a coaching cycle with a client, they will have one or two objectives. Sometimes they come with 10 and we'd have to narrow it down, but we say, okay, what's really realistic here given the next 3 to 6 months, and then we really focus on honing on that. But often, whilst we're being methodical and whilst I set homework, and the majority of my clients want that too, so we co-create bespoke homeworks in our sessions together so that they've got something to do to help them move forwards between our sessions. And that might be simply like go and observe someone who's got loads of confidence at work. Go, what do they do? How do they react? How do they respond? Blah, blah, blah. So there is definitely a methodical approach. But there's also sometimes, because the inner critic has been so loud for so long, do you know what, Jimmy? Sometimes there has to be that American rah-rah with the pom-pom.
You're getting the balance,
going, you can do this.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got this, and start singing and dancing. And so,
yes.
So sometimes some people have left, endorsements and testimonials saying, "I've got an inner cheerleader now, and she's on my side,
absolutely,
and she's rooting for me, and if I was to run a marathon, she'd be there with the water waiting for me at the end and the medal,
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, that's it,
Yeah, there's definitely a balance, and it definitely depends on the personality style. Some of my clients are much more proactive, but methodical and process-driven. And, one of them is learning all about emotional intelligence and different leadership styles now, according to Daniel Goleman. So we're working on that together.
Brilliant.
And others really like the the emotive, rah-rah stuff, and the feel-good factor. And I mean, I'm trained in mindful self-compassion and mindfulness-based stress reduction, so I've created lots of guided meditations, and sometimes those help people as well, or creating affirmations can really work, but the right kind with the right words, nothing too cheesy. But so it is interesting working with a whole range of different clients, Jim, and I wonder about your experience as well when you, as a performance coach, having to blend your own or bespoke your own approach.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, no, for sure, and I think for me, like you mentioned there, it's really interesting sometimes, Jess, where you sort of you look at other people's perspectives of what we do, and no doubt you're probably sort of having similar experiences. I sort of get called, motivational or performance, but I tend to sort of, for me, just cherry pick from what I've learned over the years. But similar to yourself, I sort of have a background and have studied, it was, I guess, it's parallels with what what you've studied in myself to a point. So what you say resonates. I've studied the likes of neuropsychology and those areas, and I think for me, what I find really useful is to be able to sort of signpost people as well to get the right help they need. If that's in terms of, say, you mentioned before, certainly subclinical people that I work with, but I generally, if I have a presentation, I'll suggest that maybe there's sort of fine line, isn't it, between, say, performance-related goal and what might be, say, pathology and might be more clinical issue. So I think the experience that you've got is great too, because obviously you can maybe signpost someone and say, well, this might not be appropriate at this point for you, and it could be a clinician really to help them in adverse performance. So not to say they can't work a performance as well as, but as you well know, there's many pathways to different things, like anxiety, depression, and other areas as well. And I tend to have a really holistic approach, Jess, and sort of bring in as many people as I can think of to sort of cross refer and say, well, let's get the best outcome for this person. Yeah.
Definitely. And at times, I spend a good half an hour talking with any potential coaching client anyway. That's just a kind of mini consultation. We get to know each other. We get to know how I get to hear their issues and their challenges that they're facing at the moment, or at least the ones that they're presenting with. Because let's not forget, they may well be presenting with career decisions to make, but actually, yes, there might be some pathology behind that.
One adverse event away, aren't we, from exactly, yeah.
And exactly. So, I know lots of clinical psychologists who do private work as well, so they don't necessarily have to go on the NHS and wait if they don't want to. And it's really important to be able to provide that person with, I call it psychological safety. We talk about that at work a lot in business psychology. But there's a psychological safety in my contract with that coaching client too. One of the first questions I will ask them on that initial call is, how much support do you currently have? And if they say, I've got a supportive partner, or somebody's, someone at work or whatever, then I know as well that they've got some external, other than, they're not just relying on me for their kind of, as their one source of personal growth and personal development.
Absolutely,
we all need, as it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to keep a person, resilient and buoyant and functioning well.
Absolutely, and for sure, Jess. And so you cover the variable, and that can have a huge impact. And I suppose the sort of question I ask a lot of the people I interview is your vision. And sometimes I'm mindful of some of the sports people I ask, because they might want to keep their vision close to their chest, really. But am I okay to they might have in mind to go to a different team or something like that. So in terms of yourself, your own sort of vision going forward, is it more of the same, Jess? I mean, you've kind of changed your career path, and you're successful now, and you're doing really well. And is it building on what you've achieved, and where do you sort of see yourself going from where you are now?
Yeah, well, I have a literary agent at the moment for a non-fiction book, which is wonderful.
Okay, wow.
That's a book on helping the helpers. a lot of the people that I work with aren't in the helping industries, but they are highly empathic and helping in almost every direction they can, whether it's not just family, not just friends, but it's in their community, especially with COVID. Perhaps they were then doing extra volunteering. Perhaps they were, looking after the neighbours and running around ragged. And often these people tend to, care for others at a personal cost to themselves and aren't really good at recognising that. And they think, any kind of self-care, that's a bit selfish, that's a bit self-indulgent, and that there's a risk there that they're not looking after their well-being. And so there's a whole book on that. Hopefully that may well be published one day, God knows. But yes, so I do a lot of online programs as well. So I have some freebie PDFs online. One of them is about how to stop self-sabotaging. I've got another one going up, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, called 13 Ways to Be Kinder to Yourself. And it's actually 52 ways to be kinder to yourself and 13 ways to identify it. And that's a part of a project I'm running called The Busy Heart. But yeah, I'm all over social media and just connecting with as many people as need to hear it, really, talking about self-sabotaging and the inner critic and self-doubt to anyone that will listen. I mean, so I've got a number of corporate clients, a little drip feed, I think. HR directors seem to be really busy at the moment with COVID, obviously. But there's like this nice drip of doing webinars. So I've got 3 live webinars all over the world for up to 1,000 people on each of them this week. All talking about emotional resilience. Another one on confidence, conscious confidence. So again, like to our point, we were talking about earlier, like where does it lie and how can you develop that? So I've got lots of really useful tips and evidence-based practice and tools for these guys on that webinar. Yeah. And then I also run my own private coaching service and online programs. And the next one, Tame Your Inner Critic, supposed to be going live in June. But I don't know about that yet. I'm sitting on the sidelines with that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I've run it so many times before, and it's going through. It's being made even more shiny, which is wonderful, and I love that program. Like, everyone gets so much from it. Like anyone that commits to it, anyway, they seems to get a lot from that one. And I've had people do that more than once because they get to the next level and they're like, "Oh, the inner critic's come out again. I'm stepping outside my comfort zone again. I need a bit of the Jess Baker, Tame Your Inner Critic principles and practice." So that's kind of it really for me, Jimmy. I'm living happily in Ludlow in Shropshire. I moved here by accident 5 years ago from London. And, as far as quality of life is concerned, this is fine for me right now.
Absolutely, a beautiful part of the world, and no, this is good for you, and that really relaxing. And in terms of sort of any listeners who you mentioned the resources, where can they find them? Jess, what are you okay to share, like any sort of website or?
It'd be great. So jessbaker.co.uk is the easiest one to remember. Jessbaker.co.uk, and then also if you Google Jess Baker Coaching Hub, you'll find my Facebook group, and you'll also find my online, all those PDFs and things are all in one place. It's called the Jess Baker Coaching Hub.
Brilliant.
And you can also find me on Instagram, the real Jess Baker. That's all.
Brilliant. No, that's
at
good.
The real Jess Baker. Almost forgot it myself then.
Yeah, that's great stuff. No, it's been really interesting talking to you, Jess. I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed that, and I think what's great too. Obviously, there's so much you can only cover on the show, and they've got resources they can look at if it's something that works for them. And I think it's great, fantastic. You have a look and see, and if something resonates, great. And I think the resources you've got, are really, really great that you offer them too. So, really want to thank you for coming aboard the show. It's been
thank you so much for having me, Jim. That's great. It's really nice to talk about the inner critic always, and that if any of it resonated with any of your viewers, then I'd love to know if you get any feedback or anything.
Absolutely.
It's always it's a great opportunity to start the conversation. So thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks for that, Jess. That was Jess Baker, business psychologist and women's leadership coach, also associate fellow of the British Psychological Society, who kindly joined us and talked about the inner critic and many things psychology, really. So, in a really interesting interview on 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.